I've obviously read this, but no one else is going to sit here and read this. Do you want
Yeah.
to just give us all a bit of context as to what your question is and why you're asking it?
Yeah, sure. So forgive me, everyone, in advance, because I'm probably going to butcher a lot of terms, like I'm not a PDI or like a PT. And my question actually stemmed from training with Dennis, because I'm currently decided to prep for a bikini show, and I want to go into a build and build a lot of muscle. And I know that there is a difference between, mechanical failure and technical failure on lifts and stuff. And then I want to know if, once you exceed, technical failure, do you still gain muscle going to like muscular failure, failure in general, or like is there a line and where that line is drawn? Because if it goes to like further than technical failure, then are you really recruiting the appropriate muscle fibers or stuff like that in order to get to your own goal?
Yeah, cool, fantastic. Thanks for that, Alex. I think the first thing we kind of want to define here, so we can continue adding a bit more context to your question, and that is just in there. You mentioned, if you were to surpass technical failure, could you still go to muscular failure? And at the first instance, I just want to say that if you get to technical failure, you can no longer rely or assume that you're even going to go to muscular failure on the muscle that you're trying to target, right? Obviously, I understand your question here, and I think there's a few parts of this question that I'd like to dissect, as opposed to just the one that you mentioned, where some coaches teach just get the reps done, and they don't care how the reps look. At what cost does this come to the individual and their end goal? That'll be the second part that we kind of talk about. The first part is something I actually want to ask you all, right? I want to ask you all. In the first part of Alex's question here, she says, in order to build muscle, you must push the muscles to absolute exhaustion. Whoever wants to go first, unmute yourselves and give me your piece of what you think about that statement there.
All failure to me is technical failure, because realistically, failure means you could not complete another rep if you tried. So if there is some sort of, say if you were to do something like a mechanical drop or something like that, you're technically not at failure yet, but all failure is technical failure.
Right, okay.
There's no differential between musculoskeletal failure or technical failure, because technique will break down, and then you won't be able to move the weight regardless.
Yeah. I think that's a good one. The small caveat, and I guess you could answer me with your stance from here. When I look at technical failure, I'm generally attributing technical failure to an exercise that is multi-jointed, right? So something that like an RDL in this case. Whereas a lying hamstring curl, I think there is a degree of technique that comes with it, but I don't see technical failure ever really coming into the mix. I see muscular failure occurring. So what do you say on that one?
Okay, so what would you say? So the way I think about it is, what would you classify as technique to a hamstring curl? Like, what do you require to be able to do a hamstring curl?
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Other than the obvious knee flexion, I think where we might be looking at, you and I here, is the hip position and the lumbar potential. If we're starting to see like a bit of laxity at the lumbar, i.e. we're going to some extension, going to some anterior orientation of the hip, then we're probably looking at a full mechanical sort of break of technique or position, if you will. But that doesn't mean that you still can't that you stop flexing the knee. Like, you can still flex the knee and develop the muscle, right? And you can still take it to quote unquote muscular failure.
But then if you're talking about like a laying hamstring curl compared to a seated hamstring curl, if you're laying, your ass is going to come up when you get to failure of your hamstrings anyway, which is going to engage your lower back and glutes a bit more.
So that's actually more interesting. But you're going to say something, Steve?
No, so then that, to me, like, in saying that though, so even if your back moves, that's not technical failure. That's technical breakdown, but that's not failure. Failure would still be going to the point where you literally can't move it, because even though the technique, yes, it's changed, and yes, the pelvic position's changed.
Yep.
I wouldn't say it's a complete failure. If like someone, gets a deadlift to just above their knee, and then they start to do the whole dog fuck in the air thing, it's like, yeah, that's not ideal technique, but that's still not technical failure because they haven't failed the lift yet.
Right. So if you were to say be in the seated hamstring curl, where we probably might not notice these things happening at the lumbar and the pelvis. How do we then differentiate there between technical and muscular failure? Is there a differentiator?
Can I?
No, there's not. Not in my opinion. There's not, because the hamstrings will fail, and then once you can't flex the knee, that's failure.
So
Can I just jump in there? Sorry.
Yeah, go.
Because I have a question to Stephen's thing about the deadlift. So if the person's like shaking the deadlift just above their knee, trying to get it up at whatever cost, is that actually going to be like helpful to their end goal of trying to lift that way? Like, are they actually going to gain something positive out of it, or is it going to subtract from their lift and, you know, not really aid to what they're trying to achieve, I suppose?
It's still going to create a stimulus. And that's the end of the day. That's what we're trying to do, is create stimulus. So regardless of whether they have the technique failure, if they were doing that every rep, then you'd want to reassess and be like, well, why do you need to do that? But if it's that one-off instance where they're doing that, that's going to still be an overloaded stimulus, maybe not to what they're trying to target with the hamstrings, be it the glutes, the hamstrings, or whatever. But their lumbar erectors are going to take over then, yeah? So then they're going to provide a new stimulus to the erectors. So they're still going to gain something from it overall because of the net force acting.
But in saying that, like, I heard something the other week about when that actually happens and people shake, it has something to do with your psoas being fatigued as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. So then you're actually coming to muscular failure of that, I'm guessing. So that was something I read. I don't know if it's true or not.
So as you can see, Alex, this is a great opportunity for you to witness a host of different. By the way, any of you other guys have anything to add to this one? Louis, Deacon, Jake, anything?
No, I know what a minute. This is actually something I wanted to cover as well. I didn't actually realize.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, as we're going through this, please ask questions. But I think, Alex, I wanted to start off with this discussion because I knew there was going to be a bit of a differentiator, and it just goes to show as that coaches, you mentioned, like, you know, some coaches that teach just get the reps done, don't care how they look, and what cost does this come, blah, blah, blah. So everyone does instinctively have a bit of a different viewpoint as to what they classify technical failure or muscular failure, or even if they do classify and differentiate between those two things. Because that kind of, I guess this will just bring more light to your question in terms of like, hey, this is probably why some coaches don't really care that much, and this is probably why some coaches do care that much. So we'll move on to the next one. And
I think,
go for it.
I think a big dependency there of technical failure and muscular failure is the goal or the outcome. So the goal outcome there obviously was to build tissue. So, you know, like Stephen's saying, I'd say in that sense, it's much of a muchness, but let's just say we're talking about a skill in terms of maybe that skill is someone who is bench pressing or squatting, deadlifting, snatching, clean and jerking or whatever. And you see this a lot in a lot of the guys I work with is they'll carry a lot of fatigue from somewhere else, whether they, you know, work, sleep, nutrition, whatever's affecting that. And you'll see a lot of technical breakdown throughout that skill or whatever lift that they're doing. And now they're just practicing shit reps, for example, and they're just building a poor motor pattern because they're at that technical failure point.
Yeah, and
there's no mechanical failure, but there is actually technique breakdown, which is affecting the outcome of the goal. So I think that's the differentiator there, is the skill versus the goal of building tissue.
Sorry.
You go, Louis.
It was Steve.
Oh, no, I was going to say, but then, so why is their technique breaking down in that lift? So in the skill-based lift, why is their technique breaking down?
It could be it's hard to say, but it could just be skill acquisition to begin with. So it's like, have they actually built the motor pattern to do that skill yet? Well, a lot of other external factors could come into it. Fatigue through other muscle groups, depending on what else is going into their training.
Yeah. I think where Steve was going to go, ultimately, it's like, you know, if bones are being displaced in in an inappropriate manner, it's because a muscle either isn't contributing or is contributing too much. Is that where you're going with, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And like,
right.
That's what I mean is like, because technically, like, you can have someone who learns a skill and they like obviously suck at that skill, but it usually comes from the fact that they don't have the required strength of some part of the subsystem to be able to complete the skill.
Fantastic. So that's a very interesting one, because that is very like motor cortex oriented, and that's kind of what we'll talk a little bit about there. But like in the case of the prone hamstring curl, for example, I think where Alex was coming from, if we just took that exercise as an example and what would be classified as a good rep or a bad rep, essentially, it's like we're looking at the subsystem and things are potentially not appearing as they were in rep 1, i.e. position of the body and stuff like that, right? But are the hamstrings, can the hamstrings still go to technical failure or muscular failure, sorry? Can they push past that point of like, and still achieve an outcome or a stimulus after things are quote unquote broken down? But we'll keep continuing on this one. And the first slide that I did have here is these two differentiators, right? So we've got qualitative and quantitative. On the left-hand side, when I say quantitative, now these are basically things that we can actually measure and track. We can measure and track. Steve, before you roll your eyes and you go, I can measure and track, Rom. We'll get there. But on the left-hand side, we've got the quantitative stuff. And the quantitative stuff is the things that we prescribe. We prescribe forces, velocities, volume, and intensity. We can track volume. We can track intensity. We can track velocity. We can track forces, right? The things that we can't exactly track because there are a little bit, there's more ambiguity than anything, are the qualitative factors as it relates to movement and movement standardization. And these are things that are going to be descriptive. And what I mean by that is range of motion and joint actions, right?
I reckon you can change range of motion if you have like a velocity tracker, because they track range of motion now.
Okay, interesting. That's quite interesting. We won't dig into that one, but that's good to know. But generally speaking, now, if you're Steve and you're at the clinic and you get people there, Steve can put them on a table and Steve can do a table test. Now, Steve can actually fucking assess joint actions and range of motion, okay? So I just wanted to start here by saying that there are two pieces to this puzzle. One of them is things that we can actually track, and these are the things that are prescriptive, they're quantitative, and these are things that we can also see, right? The qualitative ones are not easily seen, and these are the ones that we can't exactly track with precision. There is ambiguity. If we move on a little bit from here, I don't want to talk about movement without just quickly touching on what movement actually is. There's a lot more to this, but at the surface, at the simplest level, this is what it is, right? This entire diagram picture here is the nervous system, okay? On the right-hand side, we have two things mainly that comprise of the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. On the left-hand side, we have the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, comprised of the ganglions and the nerves. Now, Alex, when a movement occurs or a movement is about to occur, the brain is anticipating, it starts to send effective chemical signals to the spinal cord. Okay, the spinal cord then relays them to the ganglions, ganglions relay to the nerves innervate the muscles contract, relax, etc., and movement occurs. Does that make sense, Alex?
Oh, I meant myself. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Right. So that's not explaining any of your question here, but that's just going to show you the complexity at which can actually exist in movement standardization. At what point should we actually stop an exercise? At what point should we not actually qualify technique as good or excellent? At what point should we actually be like, yo, that was pretty shit, we're going to work on that? Or in terms of hypertrophy, yeah, look, that probably wasn't muscular failure, that wasn't technical failure, we should stop there, or not keep pushing it, even though they look like shit, keep pushing it, keep going. All right, so there is a bit of complexity there. Does anyone have anything to add on this part here? Okay. Moving forwards, we obviously have these two soccer goals, right? Does anyone like my picture here, by the way? Can you just put your hand up in the air? I was pretty chuffed with this one. Yeah, thanks, guys. We have a soccer goal, okay? Alex, we're trying to get both of these goals, both of these balls in the goal, right? Yep. Cool.
Yeah, all right. Yep,
cool,
sorry.
Cool, cool.
Yep,
So the brain, okay? We just spoke about the brain and the nervous system. How the brain is the one that commands, okay? Now, inside the brain, we have what's called a motor cortex. We have subdivisions. The subdivisions that I'll talk about is going to be the sensory motor, or the sensory motor division, broken up into the sensory and then the motor divisions, okay? The sensory division are things that we can't track. These are primarily going to be the things that I was mentioning on the first slide, things that are qualitative, joint actions, joint movement, range of motion, etc. The motor things, however, the things that we can probably observe that are happening. So the things on the right-hand side, are things that we can see from a technique perspective. So I'm looking at you doing an exercise. I can observe if things are actually happening and assuming that they're happening and the right things are happening. But then you say to me, yeah, it looks good, but I'm feeling it in this position. Now we have a mismatch, right? Where we have a mismatch of these two things aren't actually matching and we're not actually achieving the appropriate thing. So if we have an RDL, right, we're doing an RDL. From an observational standpoint, I'm watching you do repetitions and it looks good. But you say to me, yeah, I can't feel it in the hamstrings. I feel it in my low back. What's that? Can anyone tell me? Did anyone unmute yourself? And what would that mean?
Sensory.
What's that?
It'd be sensory, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so she is sensing something. Stephen, have you got something to add here?
No, not at the moment.
Right, okay, cool. So say, Alex, that's happening. You're doing the hinge, you're doing the RDL. It looks great. I would not stop your repetitions and you are pushing close to failure because we're doing hypertrophy training and stuff like that. But you're like, yo, man, I can't feel my hamstring, can't feel my low back. All righty then. It is at this stage, Alex, where I would probably start to suggest, cool, let's start altering how you do this. Let's start giving you something, reference points, constraints, change position, something to alleviate what you're feeling so that what you're feeling starts to match the things that I'm observing. So for me, when I see repetitions going like full steam sort of thing, and you might look at a repetition or look at someone doing these repetitions and you go, these are gross, these are filthy. I should have stopped a long time ago. I might be looking at them going, no, they were good. They were good. Technically, observationally, they were on the money. Where'd you feel it? I felt the X, Y, and Z. Great. That's exactly where I want you to feel it. It might look shit to a degree, but it's like, no. The two things are matching. The motor and sensory things are matching in this case. Can you see how that might work, Alex?
Yeah, I definitely do now that you've actually explained the differences between the two and what you actually look for and stuff like that and defined it.
Right. So because ideally it's like if we have this happening, like I was just saying, where observationally things are happening appropriately, sensationally they're not happening, we're only scoring one of these goals. And it's at this point where it goes, right, we might actually need to start assessing and addressing and correcting in this case. Because then from a development standpoint, we want this happening. We want both of these goals being scored. If we don't have those two goals being scored, we're getting no goals scored. So it's like if we have a mismatch of the sensory and the motor aspect when it comes to technique or movement, if you will, we then might be able to assume that development in the area that you're trying to develop may not get the stimulus that we thought it was getting, even though you were taking the reps and sets to either failure or close to failure, whatever, right? And then it starts to infer that your goals potentially as a bodybuilder wants to get on stage may not actually be as fruitful as what they could had we had taken the time and care to actually address it. Now, I know that you have worked with someone in the past who, I guess, looked at it from the entirely different perspective. They didn't really care how it looked. All they cared about was most amount of stimulus through the body. Am I right on that, Alex?
100%. Like
Right.
they had a website where it have you like calculated hitting 1 RMs all the time, or you like new PBs and stuff, and you're like trying to do a 60 kilo lat pull down when you had no absolute right to be doing a 60 kilo lat pull down because you're recruiting like the wrong targeted muscles to get the job done. So it wasn't fruitful to my goal, I suppose.
Right. Does anyone have anything to add?
Oh, I think there's also like you can look at it the opposite way in the sense that people get like a sensation. Like when they have high sensation, people typically then associate that with high stimulus.
Right.
So like a hip thrust, for example. Okay. So like girls love hip thrusts because they're like, I feel them. And it's like, we know mechanically and everything that they are probably the shittest glute exercise per se for pure hypertrophy. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But then you put them in a hinge, and although they might not get that same sensation, obviously because of muscle length different, obviously like sarcomeres, all that sort of stuff, like changing length, actin-myosin filaments crossing over. But it's like, if the joints are in the right positions, like joints act, muscles react. So if you know that it looks good, you know that there's stimulus going there. And although they might not necessarily feel it the same as a hip thrust, we're still loading into the muscle that we want, and we're going to probably drive more stimulus than we are on a fucking hip thrust.
Right. I guess that's another thing to keep in mind here, and that's kind of what I was alluding to when I was saying that, you know, when you look at someone doing an exercise from an observational perspective, you know, as a coach who understands these things, you can then also differentiate and be like, hey, observationally, this hinge is occurring and everything is occurring appropriately. Hey, but I'm not really feeling it in the hamstrings, or I'm not feeling it in my glute or whatever. You're just like, okay, cool. That doesn't necessarily mean that the muscles that we're trying to develop through this means aren't getting the stimulus. Perhaps they just haven't been stimulated in this way before, which is something that I actually noticed even when I work with someone who did hip thrusts ad nauseum, and then we started hinging for real, and it took them a long time. Observationally, they were doing fantastic hinging, but it took them a long time for them to start to associate with the hamstrings and the glutes in that manner, because they were just doing hip thrust all the fucking time, right? So, Deacon, yeah, go.
Sorry, and I was just going to say that my question come from our training session, because, you know, we did our training session, but my videos, you'd be like, yeah, these are bang on the money, like it looked all good. And they probably were to a degree, but like we identified a lot of things and we trained pretty hard, I'd say, but I didn't really have any DOMs the next day. But the muscles were so stimulated in that session that I think that's where people get misguided as well.
Yeah.
In how they're supposed to feel.
Yeah. Absolutely. Alex, do you feel like this answers some of your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet.
Really, really well. Thanks.
Lads, is there anything else you guys want to add when it comes to hypertrophy training, technique, motor, sensory, anything? Any questions?
I think that, like, with the questions.
Anything? Yeah, go, Steve. Yep.
Yeah, no, just with the whole, like, I'm not agreeing with the program that Alex was doing before, as far as, like, you know, loading up all these movements and trying to be isolative. But sometimes when you have people like, you know, there's guys in prison and they're fucking massive.
Yeah.
And it's like, because they just go and do something, because the body will, like, as far as hypertrophy or muscle building goes, you could tie a sack of potatoes to your arm and walk around for 48 hours and it'll get bigger.
Something will happen, right?
Something will happen, exactly right. So
it's all that lemon juice.
Yeah, literally, it's all the lemon juice. But that's it. Like, you can do that, and it's you'll have a hypertrophic stimulus, I guess you would say. But it's like, then that will work for some people, because some people just don't go to a threshold on a singular muscle or like a single action muscle where they're actually going to create some sort of stimulus. So it's like, if you just give them something that's going to hit everything, and then I guess too, you can look into like muscle spindles, GDOs, all that stuff, and the sensory information that's going to come in to then cross over to be able to drive more output. It's like, there is some validity to that in a sense. I'm not saying it's ideal, but there is some validity to it.
Absolutely there is. Absolutely there is, man. And, you know, but that's when it comes that's when the conversation happens around the coach and the client, where sometimes clients, you know, they don't give a shit about that. They just go, whatever, I'll just do whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I feel it here and there, and they don't even talk about technique or where they should be feeling it. They just care about stimulus. But then you've got clients like Alex, for example, and she's like, yo, man, I'm doing this exercise for this muscle particularly. How am I meant to do it? How am I meant to position myself? What am I meant to feel, et cetera, et cetera? And that's when then like this sort of stuff kind of comes in play. And I just notice it more and more and more, the more times that I'm working with these people that are bodybuilding, they get pretty fixated. They go, it's like, I want to feel this. Am I meant to be feeling this? How should I be feeling this? How should I be setting up? So I think for the other lads listening, like Deacon and Jake, it's really a case of trying to understand a little bit more about this motor cortex and what that implies on movement, how it's affected essentially. And then it's just understanding, you know, what you can observe and what you can't observe. And the things that you can't observe are pretty much going to be the things that essentially are going to make people feel sensations that you might not want them to feel, essentially, right? And then the idea is to try and bridge that gap together, at which point you know, and that's going to start to give you a decision-making process of what you want to accept as proficient technique, sound repetitions, etc. Is there any more questions on this one at all? Okay.
I also just want to clear up, I don't believe in measuring joint angles, just because, you know, you said before I was going to roll my eyes. I definitely don't. I think that's the whole like goniometer and then having your iPad hooked up to it and saying it's at this many degrees. I'm like, Fuck that. Sorry, man. Chuck it in the bin.
No, that's yeah. It's a little bit tedious and banal, and I think in certain circumstances professionals will have it, but for us here, yeah, I don't think so. All right, Steve, this was a great question, and I think we had a bit of a conversation, almost like answered this question through like 2 messages between each other. But whatever, I wanted to talk about because I think it was quite interesting. Anyway, do you just want to give us an understanding, or everyone a bit of an understanding of what you're trying to ask here?
So my thought, well, if everyone, I guess if you don't, but if you do, there's a trainer over in the UK called JP, Jordan Peters. He's just an absolute like freak. But when he does a stiff-legged deadlift, he'll do them either from a deficit or just from a platform. And he almost looks bow-legged in the sense that like his hips are here and then his knees are almost outside of his hips, but his feet are quite narrow. So I thought that by doing that, he's going into supination, which will then delay pronation. So as the bar comes up, he'll be able to produce more force as obviously the resistance profile increases. And then I thought, is that why he's doing it? So then he can delay force production to then produce more at the top. But then also too, I was thinking if the femurs are internally rotated slightly by doing that, then would that wind tension onto the glute to give him more push as he comes pretty much past the halfway point?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. And when I saw the video, I thought, what the fuck? But anyway, nonetheless, everyone pay attention to the screen. This is the stiff leg deadlift that Steve was referring to. So we can obviously see if you look at his feet, he's got like bow leg sort of stance here. He's got a relatively narrow stance. And he looks very, very stiff, right? So at first instance, after hearing what Steve just said, and you've looked at this video, is there anything that anyone wants to kind of ask or say about this and what they think might be occurring?
I can't see his feet through his lats.
That's a fair call.
How do you even get that big? Like, fuck.
Right. I think we can just look at it from this point, Steve, and we'll kind of just nut it out as we go down the list here. I'll just move us over here. Fantastic. So obviously this is what he quantifies as a stiff-legged deadlift. Put your hand up if you think that this is a satisfactory stiff-legged deadlift. No one. Why is no one putting their hand up for this to be a deficit stiff-leg deadlift?
I typically wouldn't lock out on a stiff-legged deadlift. Lock the knees out, I mean.
So you're suggesting that he has locked the knees?
Yeah, at the top he comes all the way up and then locks it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. They're almost locked. They're pretty straight. Anyone else? Why doesn't this quantify as a stiff leg deadlift?
Because it looks a bit like he's pretty much starting in like a deficit RDL kind of position.
Okay, yeah. Deacon, Jake, Louis, anyone?
I can't 100% tell from this angle.
But I think it's because his pants are black too. You can't really see how tilted the leg is.
Hey, just quickly, Deacon, are you still here?
Yeah, bro, I'm still here.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, never mind. All right, cool. So obviously I looked at this video and Steve, thank you, because I spent like 20 minutes on this video just replaying this 4.5-second clip. And I was like, what the fuck is going on, right? Trying to decipher and trying to ask you a question. And I think your question was like your own general curiosity as to like, why might he be doing this or whatever else? And I'm just going to start off by saying this, man. As a deficit stiff leg deadlift, that to me is something that observationally, I might be like, yeah, not really. There is a little bit too much bend in the knee at the start. But anyway, we'll start off by his narrow stance. And this was something that I kind of like picked up, right? So I don't even think that this guy did a narrow stance for any particular reason, but he wanted to do a deficit. And as a result of wanting to do a deficit, he had to stand on a weight plate. I think JP is a pretty smart dude, and he understands that if you're going to stand on a weight plate to do a deficit anything, make sure that the entire foot is in contact with the thing that you can actually push into. As a result of that, this guy, just clearly judging by this, Jake, is this guy compressed posteriorly?
I would say so, yeah.
Right, fantastic. You learned something. Great. Judging by the guy's skeletal archetype here, I don't even think he could get his feet any closer. Steve, if he could, he would go into so much more external rotation and supination that it would just be like, he wouldn't even be able to get into that position to even bend his knee effectively, right? So he's gone onto a narrow stance to get his feet on the plate. Smart dude, no worries. As a result of him bringing it so far in, right, because of that skeletal representation, it's putting this guy in a very, very high degree of external rotation and supination. You made a comment of delaying pronation, right? I just want to understand what the purpose of delaying pronation would be in this exercise.
We'll start to produce maximal force later in the lift.
Right. When you take upon a load at first instance, it's like, do you go into pronation like immediately, or does it like wait for something else to happen?
I would imagine you would start with, depending on the exercise, but wouldn't you start with it in the midfoot, but you wouldn't be all the way into pronation yet?
Right, but as soon as you lift, that thing is squishing. As soon as you apply concentric force, concentric action, it's flattening, it's pronating.
Yeah,
right?
but if you start with a deficit, then that would delay that though. Yeah, if you started really supinated compared to your normal stance, that would delay the amount of pronation that would occur from the bottom.
As soon as he starts pulling that bar, man, he has to pronate. He has to pronate to extend his knees to get them out of the way. I understand what you're saying by delay pronation here. I think there would be a degree of like delaying here, but no one would actually like trying to do this like deliberately to try and delay this pronation. I mentioned to you where I've taught people a deadlift and I said, hey, bring your feet in a little bit closer to give them some supination to begin with, so that they have an opportunity for pronation to actually start initiate the pull and get the thing moving, right? The worst part about this, Steve, is that even if he was trying to delay pronation, the guy's not even pronating at all. Like if we watch this video from top to bottom, like if you were to zoom into his arch, that thing's not moving a millimeter. You know, and that kind of just like goes to show that why, and that's kind of why I made the hypothesis that this guy is like, hey, yeah, I'm pretty confident this guy's pretty compressed posteriorly. And as a result of that, we're seeing rib cage and pelvic actions that are causing the feet to not be able to adopt a position, right, to have certain things happening, i.e. pronation. And as a result of that, that then means that because of an inability to do all those things, this entire stiff leg deadlift looks like a hybrid between an RDL, a bent over row, a deadlift, and a whole lot of like erector lat. I don't even know if the guy, like obviously stimulus, like we spoke about before, like stimulus at the hams, the glutes, and adductors, like non-negotiable. It would be there. But I think if you were to get someone else doing this, right, they would probably feel it in the erectors a lot more. And so that then tells me, yeah, probably not a good thing that he's doing here, not a good setup. And so when we go back to your question here of like, would this sort of having a narrow stance bias supination on the foot to work in winding tension onto the glutes, delaying pronation, allow more force production. But it's like, if we look at the glutes, for example, we've got the glute max here, and that's pretty much like the kind of that's just the glute that we want to talk about in this case. It's the one doing a lot of work here. If we then look at like the greater trochanter here, it's like the glute stretches across the greater trochanter when the femur is internally rotated. But like this guy's in a pretty large degree of external rotation, judging by the large amount of supination. So the whole winding of the glutes thing, again, I'm just like, I can't see that happening. So do you have any questions with that, Steve?
No, this is good because it's helped me, because this is actually like something I've thought about for a while, just because I've seen it pop up. And like I said to you the other day, it's not, I don't train as many people in a gym as what you would. So it's good to get your opinion on it.
I definitely train more people online than in a gym, so what I'm talking about here, Steve, is pretty much what I will apply to the deadlift as well when I teach a conventional deadlift, i.e. trying to get the stance a little bit closer, to give more supination if this person is already coming to me with a relatively compressed posterior representation, because I might look at their feet when they take their shoes off and I'm just like, holy fuck, where are your arches? Like your midfoot is kissing the ground at all times. All right, great. Or I already know that when this person starts pulling a deadlift in the normal position, the knees are just going to shoot back so quickly, the hip's going to rise, and it's going to be like a good, like a stripper deadlift, essentially. Okay, how do I troubleshoot this? Just by looking at the feet and making all this hypothesis, I go, right, bring your feet in closer, narrow the stance, get some ER, get some supination, let's go. And then we start to see nicer things happening. So, and that's primarily as a result of this. The fact that the grad canter sits underneath this little deep part of the glute max as it internally rotates, foot pronates, this thing stretches, we get like a delicious hip action. Does anyone have any questions with this? That was I think pretty deep.
Hey, Dennis.
Hey, Alex.
I have a question, but I am going to have to duck off.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. I'll try and hop back on. But
are you going to ask the question and leave?
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to let you know that before I just like leave the group and you're like, what the fuck is this bitch doing?
So you might come back. Do you refer to yourself as a bitch?
Yeah, pretty much.
That.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
All right.
so I'll probably come back, but I just need to pop away for a brief minute. So
all right,
yeah.
No worries. See you in a bit.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye. Jake, Deacon, Louis, Matt, Steve, anything to add on this one? Did that help clarify something, Steve?
Yeah, man, no, it's good. So basically, if you move the feet in on a deadlift, it just produces more supination ER. So it's going to give the glute max a better length tension relationship to work from, realistically.
Yeah. It's going to provide the opportunity for pronation, for internal rotation to occur, for glute to start wrapping around the grad canter to push hips forward. Cool. Sweet. Jake, hit us up with a bit of context on this one, man.
Yeah, sure. So it was pretty similar to the one I put in about knees in last week. Just about, I think I get taught. I think you get taught like, oh, don't flare your elbows out. You're gonna destroy your shoulder blade. But then, like at uni and stuff like that. But then I kind of thought process is similar to the squat. You kind of need to internally rotate to produce force. So
but you want some clarification.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, is there any merit in that? Is there any
cool?
Yeah,
like sweet, Matt.
Yes.
So Matt, you obviously have a lot of powerlifters on your roster. You work with the bench press a lot. At first instance to this question, what can you provide Jake here with when it comes to internal rotation of the humerus, I guess, during a bench press?
Depends on like what your arch is too, I guess. Whether you're flat back or you're someone that is like a bigger arch in the position, like where your elbows are going to go in the first place, where your grip is, that type of stuff too. In my preference in like switching from having a bigger arch to having a flatter arch now, I've noticed that my elbows are more flared because I'm more of an up and down bencher. And I feel it more in my pec than I do like my pec stretching more than I do feel it anywhere else now. Whereas like when I had an arch before, my grip was always the same. But when I had an arch, like I probably couldn't feel my pecs as much with the bench, but my elbows were way more tucked. If that makes sense to you, Dennis?
Yeah, no, that's good. Just to caveat that one there, it's like the bigger the arch is, Jake, in a bench press, the lower the touch point will be on the barbell. And by virtue, that's just going to mean an elbow position closer towards the body. The flatter the arch, the higher the touch point will be on the actual on the chest, and the elbows will be wider. But let's dig into it a little bit more, man. So obviously, what's that? Yeah, go.
You would probably external rotate the shoulder a bit more when your arch is like lower.
Right. Does anyone have anything else to add on the internal rotation action on the bench press? Cool. So Jake, how many times have you seen this little gate sole depiction here?
Oh,
a few.
Just almost every time I'm here. God.
Yeah, good. That's because I want you to leave this whole mentoring thing understanding the gate cycle at least to some degree. The reason why I'm using the gate cycle yet again, because it's a fantastic model to tell us, to show us how we interact with the world and how we produce force, essentially. We've got the gate cycle we've then got these joint actions that are occurring through the gait cycle. Remember, Jake, as we're talking about this mid part here, mid stance, midfoot, right here, this is where peak force production is occurring. If we then look at this guy sitting here, 0 degrees of extension and then 180 degrees of shoulder flexion, this here is going to be representative of the end stages of the gait cycle, essentially, right? We're in external rotation, okay? As we're transitioning through this arcing motion, around about midpoint, this is going to be a degree of internal rotation. Does that make sense so far? So if the elbow, so this all makes sense, it's all tied together. Hand is here. As we start raising the hand, we're going from ER moving towards IR. We get to here, then we start moving from IR towards ER, and then we finish off at ER. Cool? So you can imagine this point here. So if these hands are out straight, what does that look like?
Yeah, just be straight ER. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, so if his arm is out here, he's in the IR position. So what do you reckon could be happening at this point?
Oh, just compression.
Okay, yeah, great. Fucking oath, compression and force production.
Or force production. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah.
Same shit, yeah? Same. I don't know if you remember the first slide. I said same shit. That's the same shit. I do apologize for the clip art images here, but I just thought they were so clean. I wanted to really, really use them. Now,
I was about to say it'd be cool if you did one that was like laying on a bench, but you already done it.
I was going to get like actual me doing it because I was like, this is gooberish, man. What am I fucking in primary school using clip art?
It's funny because, you know, I said my brain thinks 3 steps ahead. I was already thinking that, like, oh, it'd be cool if you did one with a bench and you already done it.
Yeah. So here we are, right? We've got the start position. We've got the bottom position, about to go into press, and then the finish. Okay. When our hands are on the barbell, Jake, our hands are in pronation or supination?
Say supination.
We're in pronation. So whenever our hands are on a barbell, unless you're doing something like a Yates
row,
underhand row.
Yeah, no, sorry, all right, yeah, yeah, pronation, yeah,
right. So we're in the start position. We're starting in pronation, which is coupled with what at the humerus? Internal or external rotation?
Internal rotation. Internal rotation? External.
It's a bit of a tricky one here, but this one's going to be pronation, external rotation of the humerus in this position. Now, this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky, but I'll explain. We look at this, right? His hands straight out the front. And I was like, yeah, if his hands straight out the front, he's going to be in IR. But then here I'm saying, sorry, he's in IR, yeah. So pronation, IR. I'm so sorry. I'm not confusing you here. Pronation, IR, we start. As we start lowering the barbell, we're moving towards external rotation because we're extending the shoulder here, right? This is shoulder extension. That's coupled with external rotation, okay? As we're about to press, i.e. produce force, we're going to go from external to internal rotation and finish back up to the top, okay? So as you can imagine, I'll get to this slide in a second. If we're at the bottom here and we're in external rotation and the elbow is close to the body, say for example, and we're about to press to produce force and internally rotate, what's the elbow going to want to do?
Want to come out from the body.
Absolutely. So it's actually going to want to flare out because that's going to go woof IR immediately, like a pretty high degree of IR, and then we start producing force and go. Okay. Actually, that flaring is the commencement of force production.
It's funny you talk about this because me and like Dee were like, she was benching last night and she's like, oh, I'm talking about all this with Will in like the mentorship at the moment.
Yep.
And she's like, I'm going to try and tuck my elbows a bit more because she flares like heaps with hers because she's got a bigger arch as well.
Okay.
And she tried to tuck and automatically her elbows flew straight out to try and push a bench up.
Right. Now the thing is like, there's going to be a few things that are going to dictate, like the degree of flaring and stuff like that. Matt mentioned it before, hand position. If someone's got a narrower hand position on the barbell, are they going to achieve less or more shoulder extension as they lower the bar?
They're going to go, their elbow's going to tuck more. So
are they going to go into more shoulder extension? So if the hands are narrower, they've got a larger distance to cover. They're going to go into greater degrees of external rotation and extension. Okay. So the narrower the hand grip, the more extension, right? the more it's going to want to flare out. Okay. If I've got a wide hand position, I'm going to go through less shoulder extension, right? And there's going to be less flaring actually happening. So from an efficiency standpoint, that's why you might want to let the flare occur. Never look at the flare as like, oh my God, that shouldn't happen. The flare is representative of the knees coming in the squat. It's just an action. Of course, when someone wants to move the most amount of weight possible, we want to have less of that flaring happening because that's extra work that the body has to stop and stabilize and maintain and hold position and stuff like that. So the hand position is going to dictate how much flaring. The second thing is, of course, going to be the arch. So if someone has a really, really high arch, like I said before, the touch point is going to be a little bit higher, which means that they're probably going to go into less shoulder extension and there's going to be less demand for the flaring. If someone's got a flat back in the bench press, right, they're going to go into more shoulder extension and then they're going to be more flaring. So I'm just giving you a visual here, I'm hoping.
So what about if you have a flat back and a close grip?
That calls for maximal shoulder extension and external rotation. That is
that's
so
what Justin has,
range.
bro. That's what Justin, and it's fucking, his bench is like nuts.
Yeah, it's nuts. Yeah. I mean, like on this different slide here, we'll just look at the left here, an example. I'm just going to play that again, guys. Just look at John Hack. He's got a relatively narrow, hand position, you know, amongst most powerlifters, and pretty much fuck all arch.
I just love his feet position, just holding the bench.
But did you see that, Jake?
Yeah, no,
that is like huge, right? Let me just go back again. Woof.
Massive
they just go
flare.
out, right. Massive flare. Great, fantastic. Things are just happening. I just said a moment ago, I said, hey, you know, if you're working with someone who wants maximum weight on the bar, you probably want to minimize that. And then we see John Hack do shit like this, and we go, well, fuck it, he's got 272 kilos in the bar. What's right? What's wrong? There is no what's right or what's wrong. This is just the action that is occurring at the shoulder in terms of force production. But yeah, and then I've got a video here of a squat where I'm hopefully zooming in as I'm about to apply. Boom, we pronate, knees come in, knees go back out. We're finished. Cool.
Yeah.
So that's that one. Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, no, that does. Yeah, that clears up a lot. Cheers for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Deacon.
So I've got a quick question just on.
Yeah, go for it, man.
So with Matt, I want to ask him specifically: is your bench stronger now since you've taken the arch away? So does that mean he can access? Because now the external would be greater, so then he can access more IR, produce more force. His bench gets stronger.
So yeah, like I have noticed with my bench, I can drive more force off my chest now, like way more force than I could when I had an arch. So like, because my elbows are more flared, I feel like it's the easiest way to put it is like I could push the world away from me rather than struggle at like trying to drive force off my chest. So yeah, it is stronger.
Yeah. What does that mean from a muscular perspective? Like, could the pecs use a little bit more work?
Yeah, I just think that like I think like recruiting more pec now that I'm more like flat back, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You would be. You're going through a larger excursion of external rotation, shoulder extension. It's like the insertion point is getting further away from the origin. There's a degree of stretch that's happening here. From an efficiency standpoint, that will absolutely work for you. But there will probably come a point in time where you're going to want to look to minimize that distance covered. We spoke about knees coming in and the cue knees out I think earlier in the week. And I was saying that knees coming in is totally cool. There is a point in time where you don't want the knees to come in. And that is like when we're looking at maximal strength expression for the most part. Because that's when we start talking about efficiency. And that's when we want to look at the most solid structure and where there's no faltering. There is no left or right. You know, like I said before, the elbows flaring out is technically more work over time that doesn't want to be had when there's like, you know, a lot of weight on the bar, essentially. the idea of arching, the idea of the whole scaps back and down thing, as much as it might actually like make some of us cringe and we go, fuck, it's so overused. The entire point of scaps back and down in conjunction with the arch is to maximize posterior compression, which minimizes how much external rotation is available at the humerus, which means that the humerus like pretty much lives in that IR stage. And it's like, we're just living there because that's all we want, right? So the flat back thing, like I said, I used to bench that way for a while. I don't even want to talk about the bench, actually. It makes me sad. Does that give you guys a bit more there?
Why does it make you sad?
I just said I don't want to talk about my bench, man. Shit.
No, mine's worse than yours.
Oh yeah, I have a torn subscap, but I just haven't been able to push past it. Anyways, Jay,
So
stop laughing at me, mate.
do powerlifters struggle with like the point that they fail? Is it when the bar is coming off the chest or towards lockout?
Matt, I'll let you go at this one first.
It depends, because like a lot of
On
people
what?
I see, it's like if you're in an arch, right? I see it most of the time where people will go into their chest, pause, come off, and they stop where like it gets probably about 2 inches off the chest. So probably about where sometimes where the tricep will kick in, that type of stuff. But then if someone's on a flat back, it's like more or less I see it just straight off the chest, they get stuck, you know. So that's where I see people fail mainly.
Yeah, so when it's a flat back, because they're going through so much ER, they've got to go do so much work again to go back through IR.
Yeah.
There's like a cost time here. And it's like, it just makes the entire thing so much more challenging. The lockout thing I spoke in the session prior, like when someone fails with lockout, Matt, what do you do?
When they fail with lockout.
Like when they're having a hard time locking the bench press out.
Fuck.
Do we train the triceps or do we actually do something with the bench press?
Pin press would be something you could do. Lock them in the pin press into a position where they're failed, where the weak point is, and then find out where it is and what muscle is engaged in that point, and then work that muscle.
Yeah. On the rare circumstance, you get people failing a lockout with flared elbows. On the common circumstance, you get people failing lockouts with elbows that aren't flared.
Yeah.
And so when we think of like lockout, we go triceps. But hang on a second. Matt, Steve, what did you say earlier about joints and muscles? Who does what first and what does what?
Yeah, joints act, muscles react.
Right. And it's like, okay, we've got a lockout. We're pointing fingers at the muscle, but then we're failing to recognize that actually there's probably like a joint thing that we could be looking at here. And so when I've had people who do fail with or struggle with the lockout, I widen the hand. I widen the hands. And I don't widen it much. I mean, you can start up by widening it 1/2 inch and then another 1/2 inch and then another, etc. until we find a place that's good. And I've had people repeat, like, say, started a narrow grip at X weight, lockout problems. Here we go. Okay, let's widen 1/2 inch. Try it again. Getting a bit better. Same weight though, but still having a hard time. Let's go a little bit wider. Same weight. Boofs. See you later. We've locked out. So it's an interesting one. But yeah.
That's cool. I like that concept of it all. Oh yeah. I love this book. I've read this book. It's on my table.
Why the fuck did you read this book?
It's fucking sick.
Stephen, have you read this
book? It's funny you say that. It's on my table and I was fucking reading it like yesterday.
You guys are fucking nerds, man. Deacon, I was just going to say, mate, so we're going into your question. From what you've heard so far, have there been a lot of answers that have already kind of come out from the past discussion of the bench press?
There's a few things, like even the like, I guess I hadn't thought about creating the arches the same as like biasing more external rotation in the squat, because then I guess I'm assuming I don't need to travel as much distance as well. So that was like one thing I hadn't thought about as well. That was kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to that one then.
Yep.
I have something to talk about the arch for you as well.
Yep.
I just want to start off with the first thing here, because you said, like, I'd love to see how you break, this here. See a breakdown of the bench press, if possible, positions you like to see, why, and that's right. So I just want to kind of start off and caveat this whole bench press conversation by saying that every single one of us here, we all know what a bench press looks like, and we could all coach and teach a bench press the same, right? Then it's just about understanding a few other little bits and pieces that makes the bench press either a little bit more applicable to maximal strength expression or powerlifting, or for the people that aren't in those categories. So there's going to be a little bit of differentiator. We'll get that in a second. And that was me kind of satisfying this question here of like how I like to teach it. Man, you and I could teach the bench press the exact same. And that's it, really. Like there's no people. I'm not going to say people because I don't like to talk in that way. But the squat, bench, and the deadlift. The bench press is extremely technical. Don't get me wrong, and so too the squat and deadlift. But they are not that complicated. Like they are not that complicated to teach. Does anyone disagree with that?
No, it's not that hard to teach.
It's not that hard. The only thing that is hard is troubleshooting sometimes if you don't have an understanding of anatomy.
Yeah.
At a relatively base level, I think.
Which is 90% of coaches because they don't do anatomy first, they do it last.
Right, exactly. The paradox, because you mentioned here, like what's happening with compression and expansion. The whole conversation we were having just before about more external rotation by traveling deeper into the bench essentially, and then IR. That's all expansion and compression to a degree. Okay.
Yep.
When you look at the bench press or look at any exercise for that matter, try not to think of it as compression and expansion, like, oh, that exercise is more expansive or that one's more compressive. Because you're going to find yourself at this junction where you're going to be like, this does not make sense. Why? That's why I kind of coined this one, the paradox of compression and expansion. And I put this book out here. Expansion and compression is very, very highly attributed to biotensegrity. Biotensegrity is a great concept, and Thomas Myers talks about in his book here, Anatomy Trains, Myofascial Meridians. Talks about myofascia, slings, etc., explains biotensegrity and tensegrity quite well. And the junction that I said that you might actually reach if we start to look at things of compression and expansion within the exercise itself is that we have to understand that when load is applied, it's all compression.
Yeah, okay.
Does anyone have anything else to that?
No.
And when I say when load is applied, it's all compression, Steve, what do I mean by that?
Well, when you apply a load, like muscles have to then contract overall because you're putting a stimulus on the body. So you're going to have compression. Like the level of compression to which area will vary on the exercise load, all that sort of stuff. But once you create a stimulus greater than gravity, everything's going to contract.
Right. So a contraction is a shortening of a muscle, right? A shortening of a muscle is a concentric action. A concentric action is compression.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So if I've got like a little balloon here and I just like squeeze it from all ends, bringing things together, it's compressing. Right? I think that's as simple as it really needs to be.
Yeah.
That's just to kind of satisfy the whole expansion and compression in the bench press itself. There are a few things that we could look at, but generally speaking, the expansion and compression model is really, really good. Is a very, very useful tool in being able to look at a skeletal representation and hypothesizing that the X might occur purely based on how this guy is standing, how his feet are flat or not flat, how his rib cage might just even appear a little bit flared and stuff like that. We have like secondary and tertiary compensation patterns, but we won't even talk about those. Forget them.
Yep.
Forget I even said that. So if you want to learn a little bit more about compression expansion, or mainly biotensegrity, this is the book that you might want to read. Okay.
Yeah.
My question is,
thank you.
Yeah, go for it, man.
did you guys read it from front to back?
Absolutely not. This is the fucking most boring book I've ever read.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think there must be an ASD thing.
I haven't. Yeah, look, Steve, like I know you're a coach, but I obviously see you like as a therapist more than anything. I think this would absolutely be like your alley sort of stuff.
I just
Very
read
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I read it. Like I mentor obviously a lot of therapists and stuff like that. And if I could give every therapist one takeaway, I'm like, read that thing back to front, inside out, upside down, and you can pretty much do anything. Like literally in like a clinic, you will be able to treat any condition, help anybody. It might not fix it, but it will give them better results than 90% of anybody else out there if you just read that book.
Yeah.
I read it because Jordan Shallow said read it, and I was like, he's the king, so I read it. I just bought it straight away and read it.
Yeah. And how has it influenced your coaching?
It just helped me understand anatomy way better.
Hey, this is what it gave me, bro. This one. This was my takeaway in 2 sentences from that.
Yeah, but how does that influence your whole fucking like training, like now?
It doesn't.
Oh, okay.
Because I went down that rabbit hole of expansion and compression. I was like, hang on a second.
Okay.
Oh, so what that allowed me to do is actually look at expansion and compression and just use it as a base assumption of what this person may or may not be able to achieve based on how they present skeletally without having to interpret this.
Yeah, so I haven't been down the expansion compression model.
If you've read this, you don't need to.
Yeah.
So some of the things that you were talking about, Deacon, pretty much KPIs, key performance indicators, things that I look for.
Yeah, correct.
Everyone that's listening, please chime in if you feel like you have more, or if you disagree with the ones that I have here. As a powerlifter, KPIs I am looking for: the arch of varying degrees, leg drive, full body tension, which is going to be coming as a result of leg drive and the arch, and eccentric barbell control. The ability to control that thing on the way down whilst maintaining tension throughout the entire body, leg drive and arch, is going to be key to a successful lift effectively, right? For anyone else, I care, excuse my language, fuck all about the arch of the leg drive. I care about full body tension and eccentric control though. Okay.
But then like having a little bit of an arch is going to create like more tension, isn't it? So they're going to...
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So an arch of varying degrees.
Yeah.
Now
Okay.
you can achieve like a flat back with a bit of leg drive. Like honestly, if you get like just someone who isn't a powerlifter on a bench press with a flat back, and you just go, hey, just squeeze your shoulder blades just a little bit closer together. By default, we're going to get a little bit of thoracic extension, like a very, very tiny arch. You might even still look at it from the side and be like, there's no arch there. No worries. It's all good. And the only reason why we're doing that is to give a remote, just a tiny little bit of stability.
Yeah.
Of a flat surface on the left and the right shoulder blade, right? And then the hip. And it kind of acts like a tripod, right? It's like people always talk about tripod foot in the squat. Okay, well, fucking, yeah, I get shoulders back and down is like a really, really like rudimentary sort of cue, but there is merit to it. And I like to look at it as that little tripod sort of factor, right? So we don't need an arch. We don't want an arch for the most case, because what happens if we start getting Gen Pop or BJJ guys start bench pressing like a powerlifter? What could that imply over time to their shape?
Surely
More compressed.
Yeah, they become a lot more compressed for the back, for the posterior and the lumbar, wouldn't they?
They could. If you're going to get someone bench pressing like a powerlifter, then and you're not making them and training them in the way toward maximal strength expression, why are you even getting them to bench like a powerlifter in the first place? Like even that is a mismatch, right? Like you can get someone extremely strong in a bench press with a flat back and just a bit of like full body tension and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
And not exacerbate that arched position, i.e. exacerbating posterior compression. As a BJJ guy, you got to roll, man. You got to access that transverse plane quite frequently.
Yeah.
It's like, and when you get a bit more compressed, it sucks, right? So can you see how that might be a mismatch?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Do you have any questions so far?
No, this is good. This is good.
Matt, is there anything else that you have as a KPI?
No, that's probably exactly the same as what I looked at.
Louis, Steve, Jake?
No, I would typically I guess the arch. I would just say the ability to anteriorly expand their rib cage for some people too. So like the arch comes into that, but that's another. I would not just look at the back of it. I would look at the front around that clavicle.
That's quite a good one. I like that. So if
I
you
like
get someone, Steve, who struggles to arch, and you go, they might actually have an inability to, anteriorly expand. What do you do?
Incline cable bicep curl.
Can you just explain the mechanism for the lads?
Yeah. So so incline cable bicep curl. Typically, it would depend on the person first. So if we're saying someone who lifts weights, incline cable bicep curl, because obviously, if that was the bench, it's going to pull them as the weight draws them into shoulder extension. We're going to have external rotation, and then I would get them to, even if they really wanted to, create a bit more of an arch, and then breathe into like nasal breathing, try and expand that upper like clavicular fiber, I guess, like those upper ribs and shit. And then that just teaches them that position, so it opens them up. If it was someone who was like an office worker or something like that, it would be decline bench and then just hang their arms off the bench, because I would use gravity to force air into the top of the rib cage, because they're not going to require as much load to open it up.
Is that like similar to like a low crab style breathing where you kind of breathing into that same area?
Very similar.
I don't know what a low crab breathing style is.
A low
Sorry.
crab is like, fuck, Deacon, you want to show him what a low crab is? You can teach Stephen something today.
Oh, bro, I don't know about that. It's pretty much like the equivalent. Like I'm lying supine on my back.
Hey, Steve, you know what
He's gonna show you. There we go.
I'll show you a bastardized one. I'm on the ground, but I'm in this position.
Oh yeah, got ya. Yeah, but see, I would want to get more ER at the shoulder rather than IR and having it in that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great caveat, Deacon, because if you had your hands flat on the ground, you'd be in IR.
Yep.
So, but yeah, if it's someone who's like actually strong, I would just go straight to an incline bicep curl. Obviously, even though we wouldn't want the rib cage inverted to draw air in there, it's like this guy's so strong that I need load to open the shoulder joint. So it's like I'll trade off the inverted rib cage for more load to open the shoulder joint, and then air's going to go in there fucking anyway.
Yep. No, that's cool. Plus, that would be like 2 birds, 1 stone.
100%. Yeah, it's like, and the best part about it is that then if you think about it, you get them in a lengthened bicep position. They're going to train some biceps, and fuck, everyone loves to train arms. So
exactly.
Yeah, so arms, like training arms in these varying degrees of like shoulder flexion and extension is a great one, because it manipulates scapular position and T-spine position as well. And when it comes to like getting someone who's posteriorly compressed to get a bit more expansive sort of qualities happening, disguising otherwise rudimentary breathing drills in the form of arm exercises is a fantastic way of doing that, right? Because like it's really, really hard to expand someone with load. Like it's generally done like, that's why breathing drills, and I don't know if you know much about PRI, like blowing balloons and shit. Like it's a breathing thing. It's an unloaded thing, because like I said before, when you apply a load, there's compression. So yeah, like trying to get different areas of the body to expand is generally like a fucking unloaded thing. So you want to disguise as arm training. But on the other side of that coin, if you have someone that has an inability to arch, Louis, if you have a compressed person, I hate saying that. That sounds really weird. Let's just say we have someone who is posteriorly compressed and they have a hard time arching. Why could that be?
I missed this last part of the conversation.
Where were you, mate? You were there. Matt, what do you think? If someone is, like a big powerlifter, right? You go, fuck, you should be able to arch. He's a powerlifter, but actually can't arch. Why can't he arch?
Are you talking about like, so you're trying to go into more like arm extension? of the
Yeah.
back. So obviously their thoracic is just like really rigid and fucking big and tight. So you need to probably loosen up their thoracic so they can arch more from their thoracic, because it comes more from that upper mid part of the back rather than the lower lumbar.
It depends. It depends what kind of arch you actually adopt. You're going to adopt.
Or the rib cage could be like not as like flared and more like fucking internally rotated.
Right. So
You
now
can't
we
get
got,
into a position you're already in.
there you go.
essentially.
There you go. So, Deacon, this might not be overly helpful what we're saying here. We are diving a little bit deeper here, but we're talking about like if you get someone and they can't arch, there's a few things that and you want them to arch because you want them to set up in this powerlifting strategy bench press to move most amount of weight possible. There are some things you should look at. It's like, can they arch? No. They might not be able to arch because they're already fucking there. Like they live in that position. So they might actually require some work posteriorly, like some posterior compression. Alternatively, they might actually need some work anteriorly, like what Stephen was saying. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly which one, who needs what, which one of those essentially. But they are some strategies. So we're talking about here because you spoke about your position of the bench press, and your position of the bench press reminded me of this one, but with the feet on the ground actually. And
yeah, like the hook line.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, why you bench press the way that you bench press.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I've kind of done it because I've tried to, and maybe it's a bad thing, I don't know, but I've tried to avoid, say, like having the arch.
Why is that?
So, I don't know. I just like I get a pretty jacked up lower back from being folded like a pretzel all the time. So I just kind of avoid putting myself in that type of extension.
Yep.
But it's like probably not the best thing, you know. So what I've kind of done is, so imagine that hook lying position.
Yep.
And then say I put some plates down below so I can still get enough drive off through the legs.
Yep.
And then I've literally had the feet just stacked in front. So everything's like I've kind of maintained a stack from the rib cage, the pelvis,
Right.
and then I've been able to drive through the heels. Yeah.
So you've maintained this position of the body.
Correct.
Why are you trying to stack in a bench press?
It's just kind of the way I guess I was kind of taught, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was there a rationale for that teaching at all?
I guess to try and focus on creating, but I mean, as you said before, you kind of maybe create more pressure, and expansion in the arch. So I don't know. That's where I guess I'm at a crossroads right this second. Yeah.
This is great. If you have this stack here and you place your feet on the ground, you're moving from hip flexion to hip extension. And hip extension is coupled with, I mean, not necessarily, you can disassociate, but if we extend the hip, we can also see a cascading effect upstream of extension or flexion.
Yep.
Which one?
Extension.
Right. So if we were to go feet on the ground, so we're trying to maintain this stack position, and then we go feet on the ground. I know you said you elevated your feet up slightly, so you might be in a position where you can maintain this posterior orientation.
Yeah, I usually can.
Oh, okay. If that's the case and you can maintain this position, fantastic.
Yep.
It's just a very interesting position. I just wanted to see whether or not
you're
trying to hold this stack position for bracing purposes or
that's
like expansion purposes.
I guess expansion purposes. Hey.
What are you trying to expand?
So for instance, like I'll try and keep the rib cage quite low as I exhale, and then instead of getting into this like that same extended position.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've kind of worked on. But,
so what are you trying to expand? The front or the back?
The back.
The back.
Yep.
Are you rotating? Are you alternating, or you know this is a
bench
bench press?
No, I've done I do those sometimes. Yeah, not like a dumbbell alternating press.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So and that's absolutely fine. It's like, you know, if you're bench pressing with a bar in this position, you got your feet there. Look, man, that's fine. If the conversation is then like, you know, how do I get stronger? That's not the position.
Yep.
It's just not conducive to compressive strategies. You know what I mean? But you can get so strong in this position still. And I would go as far as to say that, you know, even if we did start, say we stayed in this position and we got as strong as you could in this position, there's probably a threshold that you would cross in from a strength perspective that would start to bias you more into that compression bias anyways. And that could actually start to showcase as a decrement to your performance in BJJ. So as you're benching, great. I just wanted you to at least understand that this sort of shit is like what we're looking for to maximize compression, to maximize strength output. And I guess this sort of stuff that we're trying to do
on that. Yeah. My question is, do you ever program hook lying dumbbell press for anyone in your programming?
A dumbbell press or an alternating dumbbell press?
Just like just normal dumbbell press, like, or even in incline. Because I know Jamie Smith and that you used to do a fair bit of it in like Melbourne strength culture.
Yeah, I have not had a rationale to do it, man.
It's just I think it comes. Does it come a lot from like their PRI background? Do you reckon?
100%. 100%. It's like the only time that I've given someone a hook lying bench is when they had some issues at the lumbar. Like it was hurting them. You know what I mean? Like because something like they had like an actual like blunt force trauma to the area essentially. Other than that, man, I actually can't. I don't know. I don't program that at all.
Yeah. Because I know Jamie and Smith and all that do. So
yeah. I do like reaching exercises, but even then, man, I do think that the expansion and compression thing gets taken like really, really far in some circles, I guess. And it drives a lot, but as I tinker more and more, I find myself doing, thinking that way less and less. Just because I don't know, it can get a little bit confusing. Like Deacon, is it confusing?
I look at it this way.
A little bit.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
I look at it this way. My team got the strongest the way they are. I don't need to fucking look at it.
Yeah, look, that's a viable point, man. That's a viable point. I think like understanding task demands, Deacon. I don't know if you're going to work with powerlifters. You're probably going to work with people that I don't know want to access the frontal and transverse plane more than just the sagittal. So like, you might not want to look for compressive strategies for the squat, bench, and deadlift. As for me, it's like I just go on a case by case basis. If I get a powerlifter, great. I'm going to fucking stiffen you up. Oh, my shoulder hurts. All right, sweet. We're just going to do a little bit of less stuff, maybe some more alternating stuff. Fantastic. Off we go, sort of thing.